Extremely excited to be here, guys. Thanks to everyone for coming to listen to this talk. So the title of the talk is, taking neural networks and using them to reinterpret or reimagine what African mask art really could be. And it looks like if my slides have a mind of their own. Okay, and so for my background, I'm a research engineer. My interests are at the intersection of human-computer interaction, user behavior and psychology, and applied artificial intelligence. And so some of my work explores the areas of how can we make AI more accessible to non-technical audiences, and how can we apply AI in improving user interactions. And so part of this talk will be slightly technical, and I hope it will inspire conversations in this area. And so for me, just like many of us here, this project, Why Explore Art and AI? And so this project is inspired from my personal experiences, and especially my desire to use my professional skills to connect both with and express my culture and identity. And so I grew up in eastern Nigeria, and back then we had this yearly tradition of community gatherings where there were dances with all these dancers who had these elaborate African masks. And so ever since then, I've been fascinated by African mask art and especially their history. And the second goal of this little project is that, as neural networks become more common, they begin to inspire a new genre of AI-inspired art. Most of what we see right now tends to be interpretations of classic European art. So think Picasso, Rembrandt, Van Gogh. And I think there really is opportunity to diversify this conversation, and that's part of the mission of this work. And then finally, as a research scientist, I want to explore and quantify the novelty of this kind of art. Is it really generating new stuff? How important, how interesting is all of this? And so the questions I ask myself is, can I leverage a machine as an assistant that helps me develop new interpretations of African mask art? And this is important because to interpret is to understand, and a great way to understand is to actually create. And so the other things I want to explore is how can I ask questions of the results that have been obtained? Are the results novel? What kind of patterns emerge? And how does data quality affect results? And so the images you see here are the training data I gave to my neural network. And so some of what you see here is the image on the left is a mask from the Igbo tribe in eastern Nigeria. And we have a mask from the Benin tribe also from Nigeria, and a Chokwe mask from Congo. And one of the things you realize really fast when you dig into African mask art is that it's fierce, and that's because it depicts the spirits of our ancestors. They're mythological beings, and they're believed to be beings that have power over humanity. So it's pretty powerful, pretty interesting. The other interesting thing is that masks, they're a central part of community memory. They represent, times like celebrations, initiations, crop harvesting, war preparations. These masks are also pretty sophisticated. They represent complex art in both design and ranges of material used. And interestingly, they're one of the earliest forms of art, and so they date back as far as the 9th century BC, so that's pretty cool. And so how did I go about this little process? I took advantage of something called generative adversarial networks. And so I know it's quite a mouthful, but the important thing you need to know is that this is just a neural network, a computer program that has two interesting parts. And so the first part is something called a generator. So it's just a neural network that learns to come up with new images. And the second is something called a discriminator, something that learns to tell, is this image real or fake? And believe me, guys, if you train these things really carefully, they can give you results that look like this. And so what you see here is a collage of images, and none of this is actually real. Yeah, so these are all examples of images of mask art that have been generated by a neural network when we actually teach it to see a bunch of training images. And so this is the general process. You create a data set. And so with my work, I came up with about 9,000 examples of African mask art, and we gave that to a neural network. And then I went through the process of kind of like selecting good outputs and then updating those. And so it turns out that you could also go further, use neural networks to also update and enhance the quality of these images. through a process called super resolution GANs. And so it's another mouthful, and I don't have enough time to go into the details of that. And so, but what I could leave you with is some of my favorite examples. And so here on the left is the input to that network, and on the right is a super resolution version of one of those results. And so this is another interesting result I found as I went through my experiment. And this is another example. And I do have a curated list of some of these really good, interesting results. More examples. And so at the end of this, what are some of the things that I really thought about? And so the first thing is, as a research scientist that works with people, the first thing has to do with ethics. And so the thing is, it's important that when work like this is performed, it's important that there's the proper amount of attribution. And more importantly, it's important that whatever results or proceeds that come out of these essentially we find ways to connect this back to the sort of source of the work, the people in Africa. And so the second updates is that it turns out that really applying this two-stage approach really helps us create novel art. And then the third thing is that there's opportunity to foster culture, identity, interest, and conversations using projects like this. And finally, if there's anyone here who is really interested in computational art and neural network approaches to working on neural network approaches, AI and arts, I actually have some open source code that anyone can take advantage of and start working in this space. And if you have an art exhibition, show, or conference where you think this work might fit in, definitely get in touch. Thank you.